The smell of jet fuel and overpriced coffee always clung to Chloe's designer scarves. I watched her tall, efficient form disappear through the TSA checkpoint, her carry-on bag clicking precisely across the polished tile floor of Seattle-Tacoma. She glanced back once, offering a quick, practiced wave, the kind of wave you give to someone you fully expect to see next week, completely unchanged, completely safe. That predictability, that assumption of safety, was the foundation of the last 20 years of my life. I had built a character, Alara Vance, the overly dedicated suburban grandmother, slightly eccentric about her garden, prone to knitting too many beige sweaters. I wore the role like a tailored suit. "Grandma, let's go," Leo said, pulling on my sleeve. His 10-year-old voice was usually high and cheerful, but now it held an unnerving adult urgency. I nodded, strapping myself back into the role of the slightly flustered elderly driver. Chloe was officially airborne, heading to a 3-day conference in Boston. The window of vulnerability was open. The drive back to Redmond was a blur of gray drizzle and rush-hour brake lights. I ran through the checklist, the internal mantra I hadn't consciously recited in years: perimeter integrity, contact status, contingency routes. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was a picture of suburban perfection: white picket fence, freshly mowed lawn, pumpkins arrayed artfully on the porch. But my gaze didn't linger on the pumpkins. It locked onto the terracotta pot sitting by the porch swing. It was broken. Not shattered by wind, but methodically cracked on the lip, and the soil, rich, dark, and smelling faintly of the Pacific Northwest pine, had been replaced entirely. In the middle of the fresh soil sat a single, vibrant pink hibiscus bloom. Rule number 7. No flora that cannot survive the local climate. The hibiscus was the sign. It meant they hadn't just watched the house, they had entered. They hadn't taken anything visible, they rarely did. They wanted me to know they'd been there. They wanted me to know the game was over. I cut the engine and the suburban silence rushed in, thick and heavy. Leo had already unbuckled and was sliding out of the SUV before I could give the all-clear. He stood rigid on the driveway, his slight body tense. He didn't look at the flower, he looked at me. He had been trained since he could walk. Not formally, never with maps or weapons, but with the rules of observation, silence, and immediate compliance. He walked quickly to my door, grabbed my hand, and the grip of his small fingers was surprisingly strong, grounding. "Grandma," he whispered, his eyes wide and dark, scanning the empty street with professional precision. "We have to go. Now." I managed to keep my breathing even. My heart, which had been a quiet, background hum for 2 decades, suddenly roared in my chest like a jet engine. "What are you talking about, sweetie? We just got home." The voice I used was soft, grandmotherly, completely detached from the cold logic flooding my brain. He didn't flinch at the act. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear, delivering the crucial information. "She's left. We have to leave." She. Not Chloe. The operative who had been maintaining intermittent surveillance. They had just switched shifts, or worse, they had just been eliminated by a more aggressive team. Regardless, the perimeter was compromised. The pretense dissolved instantly. The tired bones and slightly aching knees of Alara Vance vanished. What was left was Alara, the operative. My mind was already calculating escape vectors, fuel consumption, and contact latency. The years of quiet gardening, the PTA meetings, the gentle scolding about homework, all of it was the thick, deliberate camouflage I had meticulously woven. And now I had to burn it. I did not question him. I did not debate the validity of the threat. I simply responded, knowing that hesitation was measured in seconds, and seconds were lives. I reached across the center console, pulled the hidden lever beneath the dashboard that unlocked the panic room closet in the garage, and grabbed the keys. "Get inside, Leo. Go to the garage. Get the black bags." He didn't run. He moved with the same fluid, silent efficiency I had taught him. The back door opened and closed without a sound. I looked down at the broken pot, at the unnatural, vibrant pink of the hibiscus. Marcus. It had to be Marcus Bell. He was the only one who knew that signal, the only one brutal enough to use it. I shoved the keys into the ignition. And that's what changed. The lie of my life, the peace I had desperately sought to protect my daughter was over. The only thing left was the desperate flight toward the next layer of deception, with a 10-year-old child as my only ally. The two black canvas bags stood precisely where I had left them 2 years ago, tucked behind the old water heater in the cool, oil-scented corner of the garage. They looked like oversized gym bags, unremarkable and forgotten amidst the gardening tools and the children's abandoned bicycles. Leo was already there, his face pale but determined, clutching one of the bags. He was 10, but in moments like these, he became the sharp, silent partner I had trained him to be. "The window is closing, Grandma," he stated, reminding me that even tactical efficiency requires brevity. "I know, Leo." I grabbed my bag, heavier than his, containing the things Chloe, my sweet, oblivious Chloe, would never have believed I owned: burner phones, cash reserves from 3 separate caches, and a small, heavy piece of metal wrapped in oilcloth. I bypassed the front door, slipping through the side entry into the laundry room, checking the passive motion sensors on the way out. They were all green. No immediate, obvious breach. They were professional, and professionals waited until you were exposed on the road. We got back into the car. Not the family SUV, but the older, nondescript sedan parked in the back of the driveway. It had good mileage, no GPS tracker, and tinted windows. I backed out slowly, deliberately using the standard suburban 3-point turn, adhering to the speed limit. Panic was the first giveaway. "We're going the long way, Leo," I murmured, pulling onto a side street immediately instead of the main thoroughfare. He nodded, already settling into the back seat like a small shadow. He knew the drill. For 10 years, his life had been a delicate balance between normal childhood and my special rules. Rule 1. Never reveal family routines. Rule 4. Never use a personal name or relationship on an untrusted line. Rule 7. Pay attention to what doesn't belong. The hibiscus. We lived, as I called it internally, on low flame. We existed just below the threshold of digital noise. We used cash, we rarely traveled, and we cultivated an image of amiable, predictable monotony. It was exhausting, but it worked. Until today. "I need you to look, Leo," I instructed, keeping my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Not for faces. For pattern. We drove for 15 minutes, heading east, away from the city sprawl and into the forested foothills. I switched lanes frequently, obeying every traffic law, but breaking the rules of statistical predictability. I was driving invisible, a complex dance of speed fluctuations and seemingly random turns that made me disappear in the flow, difficult for a remote observer to flag or follow digitally. My internal monologue was a torrent of cold fury. I had given up everything for this peace. I had let my daughter think I was just a woman whose best years were behind her, also she could be safe. And now Marcus Bell was forcing me to peel back the lie in front of her son. I risked a glance at Leo in the mirror. He wasn't looking out the windows for threats. He was looking down, carefully handling something. "What do you have there, sweetie?" I asked, my voice suddenly tight. He looked up, a tiny frown on his face. He held out a small, heavy object. It was a 1943 steel cent, a penny made of zinc-coated steel due to wartime copper shortages. It was dull gray, slightly dinged, completely unremarkable to anyone else. "I found it, Grandma," he whispered. "In the lining of the winter coat you told me to put away. It was sewn inside the seam. You said if I ever found something unusual I couldn't understand, I had to keep it safe until you asked." The air rushed out of my lungs. I nearly missed a green light. I hadn't seen that coin in 22 years. I thought I had destroyed it. I thought it was gone. "Where exactly did you find it, Leo?" I asked, my voice low, a razor's edge beneath the calm. "In the coat, you know, the one you always tell me is too warm for Seattle." That coat. My old operational jacket, stored for years in vacuum-sealed plastic. I hadn't destroyed the chip. I had hidden it inside a dummy coin, thinking it would be found long after I was dead and the information was useless. The coin wasn't a coin. It was a casing. Inside, smaller than a grain of rice, was the microchip I had stolen from Marcus Bell 2 decades ago, the data he needed to complete Project Mercury. The data that would give him absolute control over the continental power grid. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about the mission. Marcus hadn't just found me. He had discovered the existence of the artifact he believed I had destroyed. Leo, I said, focusing on the road but feeling the weight of the steel scent vibrating in the air between us. That coin is the most important thing you will ever hold. Do you understand? Yes, Grandma. Is it the treasure map? He asked, using the coded language I had always taught him for anything dangerously important. It is. And the bad men know we have it now. We must keep it safe at all costs. The stakes had just been raised from simple survival to protecting the free flow of power across half the country. I was no longer just running from my past, I was running to stop a catastrophe. We had to reach the ghost's cabin. 100 miles to the north, deep in the mountains. My sanctuary. My only chance. I gripped the steering wheel, the cool plastic biting into my palms. I was 72 years old, driving an old sedan with a 10-year-old spy in the back seat and holding the fuse to a political bomb that had been ticking for over 2 decades. The silence was gone. The quiet vigil was just beginning. The road twisted up through the dark, damp forests of the Cascades. The higher we climbed, the more the rain turned to a dense, cold mist, swallowing the light. My shoulders ached, not from the driving, but from the 20 years of tension finally snapping. How much longer, Grandma? Leo asked quietly from the back. Less than an hour, sweetie. It's almost impossible to reach this place unless you know exactly where the turn is. The ghost's cabin, I never called him by his name, even in my thoughts, was an isolated, ramshackle structure built generations ago. It belonged to Carlisle, my former handler, a man who taught me that true anonymity wasn't about changing your name, but about becoming utterly boring. Carlisle had died 5 years ago, leaving the property to a trust, with the key taped beneath a specific loose paving stone in my suburban garden. I had retrieved it that morning, moments after seeing the hibiscus. I navigated the final mile of unpaved logging road. It was deeply rutted, choked with fallen pine needles, and smelled overwhelmingly of wet earth and ancient cedar. Finally, the trees parted, revealing the cabin. It was perfect in its imperfection. Gray, weather-beaten cedar logs, a heavy slate roof covered in moss, and one narrow, boarded-up window facing the dense woods. No lights, no wires, no cell service, a true vacuum. I cut the engine 100 yards from the cabin, and we proceeded on foot, moving through the thick undergrowth. Leo, perimeter check. For points, I ordered. Leo immediately circled the cabin, looking for disturbed soil, fresh tracks, or signs of forced entry. This wasn't a game. He knew the seriousness. Clear, Grandma, he reported, his small flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Looks untouched. I used the heavy iron key to unlock the reinforced door. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust, mildew, and the faint, enduring aroma of pipe tobacco, Carlisle's ghost. We set about the immediate tasks, securing the door, checking the emergency food cache, sealed MREs, circa 2008, and lighting the small, wood-burning stove. The cabin was utterly primitive, but it was structurally sound and, crucially, untraceable. As the stove began to radiate a weak, welcome warmth, I felt the tension in my jaw release slightly. We were safe. For now. I placed the steel scent, the artifact, on the rough-hewn table, covering it with an inverted pewter mug. Food first, then sleep, I declared, stirring the instant oatmeal. Leo, exhausted from the tension of the day, ate quickly. He didn't complain about the lack of Wi-Fi or television. He was too wired for survival mode. While he washed the bowls with water from the hand pump, I turned my attention to the small, dusty shelf above the fireplace. It was where Carlisle used to keep his rare books. I ran my fingers over the familiar bindings, Hemingway, Faulkner, and the battered copy of The Art of War. My hand stopped. Next to the leather-bound Sun Tzu, nestled between the heavy volumes, was a small, pristine tin, the color of moss agate green. It was a new, factory-sealed tin of Ceylon white tip tea. My breath hitched. I preferred white tip. It was a rare, expensive tea, almost impossible to find outside of specialty shops in Seattle. Carlisle never drank it. And the dust layer on the surrounding books confirmed that this tin had been placed there very recently. I felt a cold dread, worse than the immediate flight from the suburbs. Marcus hadn't just found the house, he had found the destination. He didn't just know what I had, he knew where I would go. This wasn't an escape route. It was a pre-arranged meeting spot. "Leo," I called, keeping my voice level. "Stay near the stove." I approached the tea tin slowly. If Marcus had been here, he would have left a trap. He was too professional not to. I gently moved the tin. Beneath it was a small, folded piece of thick paper, the kind used for operational memos. I unfolded it. The note was written in the crisp, stylized hand I knew instantly. Marcus's script. "Alara, I always knew you'd retreat to the perimeter edge. I waited. The tea is fresh. Enjoy your brief sanctuary. I prefer the hunt to the kill. You have something I need. And now I know you still have the temperament to protect it." He hadn't just followed us, he had anticipated us. He had allowed us to reach the cabin because he wanted to confirm the location of the chip. He was mocking me. He was playing a long, cold game of cat and mouse. I crumpled the note, tossing it into the stove where it instantly incinerated. "Grandma?" Leo's voice was filled with question. "Nothing, sweetie. Just old dust," I lied smoothly. I looked at the mug covering the artifact. Marcus knew I had the chip. He knew I was at the cabin. He had proved that my most secure sanctuary was compromised. The quiet corner of the mountains was nothing more than a temporary, extremely exposed box. We couldn't stay. We had to move deeper. But first, I had to ensure that Chloe, somewhere above the Midwest in her pressurized aluminum tube, was still blissfully unaware. I pulled out the old satellite phone, a chunky device powered by solar energy, and watched the tiny, flickering signal strength indicator. 1 bar. Barely enough for a quick, coded call. The weight of the hunt was back on my shoulders. Marcus Bell was close. And he was enjoying the chase. The satellite phone finally stuttered to life. The connection was brittle, strained by the dense canopy and the sheer altitude. I knew the call would be intercepted or at least logged, but I needed to risk it. Marcus had been watching me for weeks, perhaps months. A single burner call wouldn't change his calculus. I stepped outside the cabin, shielding the phone from the damp air with my body. The cold seeped into my worn hiking boots, but I barely noticed. The cold inside was sharper. I dialed Chloe's primary number. It connected almost instantly, ringing in New York, where she was theoretically still waiting for her ride from LaGuardia. "Mom? What is going on?" Chloe's voice was clipped, professional, and radiating annoyance. "I've tried calling you 3 times. You know I hate when you don't pick up." "I'm busy, Mom." Her irritation was a familiar shield, a way she kept the world and me at arm's length. It was painful, yet comforting. If she was annoyed, she was normal. She was safe. "I know, honey. I'm so sorry," I said, injecting just enough static into my voice to make the lie sound plausible. Terrible reception. "I got a sudden, urgent call. You remember Mrs. Peterson?" Chloe sighed dramatically. "The one with the prize-winning rose bushes?" "That's the one. Her sister had a fall in Vancouver." I drove up immediately to sit with her. "We're in some terrible rural hotel near the border. Just no signal." I should have texted, "I'm sorry." "Vancouver." Chloe repeated, suspicion creeping in. "You hate driving across the border." "It was sudden, darling. Life happens. But listen, I have to go soon. The signal is dropping fast. I just wanted to tell you I love you and everything at the house is fine. Leo is with me, helping Mrs. Peterson's grandson with his science fair project." I listened for the slightest change in her cadence, the micro-expressions of her voice. I was lying expertly, weaving a narrative so mundane and so Alara Vance that she would swallow it whole, despite her annoyance. "Fine," Chloe conceded, clearly dismissing the whole incident as typical motherly eccentricity. "Just keep your phone charged. And don't let Leo eat too much maple syrup. I'll call you when I land tomorrow night." "I love you, Chloe." "Love you too, Mom. Bye." Click. The line went dead. The silence after the abrupt cutoff was deafening. I leaned my head against the rough cedar wall, fighting back the tremor in my hands. The deception was successful, but the emotional cost was steep. I had spent 2 decades meticulously crafting a separation from my daughter. I shielded her from the brutal truth of my past, that I was a killer, a thief, a ghost who had walked away from a world of shadows with blood on her hands. I had kept her safe by keeping her ignorant, by forcing her to believe I was nothing more than a simple, slightly tedious woman. And she repaid that by treating me with polite, exasperated distance. She is safe. That is what matters. But the distance was now a dangerous liability. If Marcus tried to use her, and knowing him, I needed her to trust me implicitly, to follow instructions without question. The current relationship, built on pleasant half-truths and her low expectations of me, wouldn't survive a crisis. I trudged back into the cabin. Leo was kneeling by the stove, warming his hands. He hadn't asked about the tea tin, hadn't asked about the cryptic note. He was waiting. I sat opposite him, placing my hands near the heat. "Leo," I said, my voice heavy. "We can't stay here. The men who want the treasure map know this place. We have to leave immediately. Before sunrise." His eyes met mine. They were old eyes, reflecting an intuition far beyond his years. He was the only person in my life who saw through the Alara Vance facade and accepted the underlying steel. "Did they come here?" he asked, not panicking, just seeking facts. "Yes, but they haven't set the trap yet. They wanted to make sure we were here first." I felt a brief pang of pride. I didn't need to baby him. I needed to arm him with the truth. "They want the coin, Leo. It's not just a map. It has information they need to be very powerful. And they think that if they find us, they can force me to give it to them." He reached for the pewter mug, protecting the artifact. "What do we do?" "We are going deeper into the Matrix, darling. We are going to the city." Leo frowned. "I thought cities were dangerous." "They are. But we were easy to find out here. In the city, we become numbers. Noise. We use the anonymity I've practiced all these years. We're going to Portland. It's messy, complicated, and Mark, the man looking for us, will assume we are hiding in another cabin." I retrieved a tattered, heavy atlas from the old crate, unfolding the worn paper onto the table. My finger traced a path south, then west, avoiding all major highways. My strategy had shifted completely. Marcus expected the isolated, defensive Alara. He expected me to hide the artifact. But I was tired of hiding. If I ran, he would always be one step behind. If I turned and faced him in the chaos of a major city, I could use the noise and confusion to my advantage. I looked at the steel cent, the heavy, ugly little piece of metal that had wrecked my life and now held the fate of thousands in its silent data. "Get your bag, Leo. We leave in 10 minutes. We're going to need fuel and a serious change of clothes." We left the cabin exactly as we found it, cold, empty, and silent. A beautiful, carefully crafted lie. I wanted Marcus to find the tea tin, and I wanted him to think I was still running for the mountains. The moment the sedan slid onto the dark road, heading south instead of north, I knew I had actively initiated the conflict. The hunter had become the hunted, but only because the prey had decided to leave crumbs pointing in the wrong direction. We drove all night, using the back roads that crisscross the vast timberlands and agricultural valleys of Washington state. The old sedan handled the winding roads admirably, its engine a low, comforting hum in the darkness. I drove without music, relying on the sound of the tires on the asphalt, listening for the faint, steady pulse of an unwelcome follower. As dawn broke, a pale, indifferent smear of pink and gray on the horizon, we were pulling into a small, forgotten town on the banks of the Columbia River. We needed to blend in, rest, and more importantly, I needed to process why Marcus had waited 20 years to make his move. Leo was asleep in the back, his head nestled against his black duffel bag. I pulled into the deserted parking lot of an old-fashioned diner, cutting the engine. I closed my eyes for a moment, not for sleep, but for focus. I let the memories of the past, so fiercely suppressed, flood the present. Zurich, 1988. The air was sharp with the smell of expensive coffee and old money. I was 38, operating under the alias Evelyn Thorne, a corporate consultant specializing in energy logistics. I wore tailored suits and spoke 5 languages fluently. I was at the peak of my career, not as a spy, but as a specialist tasked with retrieving proprietary information that threatened global stability. Marcus Bell was my partner. He was 35, brilliant, charismatic, and dangerously ambitious. We were the perfect team. He had the social engineering skills. I had the technical expertise. Our target was Project Mercury, a covert operation funded by a coalition of oil cartels to install a single, unreadable microchip into the core operational networks of major global power grids. The chip wouldn't shut down the power, it would give them control over pricing, allocation, and, crucially, the ability to induce rolling blackouts designed to create maximum political chaos and financial instability. Marcus and I succeeded. We penetrated the secure vault beneath the old Zurich bank. The retrieval was clean. But then, everything changed. We sat in a rented safe house, the microchip resting on a chessboard. Marcus looked at it, his eyes gleaming not with relief, but with feverish greed. "We don't give this back, Alara," he'd said, his voice low and seductive. "This is not ours, Marcus. This is the mandate. We retrieve, we stabilize, we bury the data." Bury it? We hold it. Think of the power, Alara. We don't have to choose a side, we become the balance. We control the biggest companies in the world. We could dismantle the whole rotten structure. He wasn't an idealist. He was a narcissist who saw global systems as a challenge to his own potential. He wanted to use the chip for blackmail, for leverage, to become the invisible hand guiding the world. I knew in that moment that he was more dangerous than the cartels we were fighting. "No," I said, and the single word was enough. The confrontation was swift, brutal, and silent. I used my training not to kill him, but to incapacitate him. I took the chip, replaced it with a dummy, and vanished into the night, leaving him tied up in the safe house for my former colleagues to find. I framed the situation as a solo extraction gone wrong, suggesting Marcus had suffered a nervous breakdown due to stress. I had betrayed my partner, but I believed I had saved the operation and possibly averted global economic warfare. But I hadn't destroyed the chip. I knew if I destroyed the data entirely, the cartels would simply start over. I needed the chip to be a threat that could be activated if anyone else tried to replicate Project Mercury. I needed it to be a deterrent. I hid it. I ran. I created Alara Vance, the grandmother. The smell of brewing coffee snapped me back to the present. The diner was opening. I looked at the worn steel scent on the dashboard. Marcus hadn't waited 2 decades out of incompetence. He had waited because he never stopped looking for the chip, and he couldn't move against me without knowing where the artifact was. The hibiscus signaled, "I found your house." The tea tin signaled, "I found your sanctuary." And the appearance of the coin signaled, "I know what you are truly protecting, and I know the location is now unstable." Marcus now ran his own powerful, legitimate-looking security corporation, a perfect front for illegal surveillance and corporate espionage. He had the resources, the reach, and the patience of a true predator. He wasn't seeking revenge, he was seeking completion. He wanted to finish the Mercury project, and he needed the original, untraceable microchip I had stolen. I woke Leo gently. "Time for breakfast, partner." As we entered the warm, fluorescent light of the diner, blending in with the truckers and early risers, I looked at my reflection in the window. The tired, aging woman was still there, but behind the familiar eyes, the operative was fully awake, calculating and ready. I ordered pancakes for Leo and black coffee for myself. The taste was bitter and reviving. We had reached a momentary ceasefire. But the real war, the one where I had to actively hunt the man who was hunting me, was about to begin. The diner breakfast was a necessary reprieve, a moment of enforced normalcy that helped Leo momentarily forget the life-or-death stakes. But now we needed fuel, and that was the most dangerous transaction we would have to make. A gas station was the epicenter of digital surveillance, CCTV, license plate readers, credit card traces. I drove 10 miles south to a small, isolated stop that looked as if it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The pumps were ancient, requiring cash only, and the office was a grimy shack run by a solitary, bored attendant. I parked the sedan deliberately, positioned so the rear license plate was shielded by a rusted storage dumpster. "Stay low, Leo. If anyone approaches the car, or if I tap the horn twice, you lock the doors and don't move until I'm back." Understand? Yes, Grandma. Low profile, he confirmed, already sinking down below the window line. I retrieved my wallet from the hidden compartment in my bag. Cash. Always cash. As I approached the pump, I performed a quick visual sweep. No unusual vehicles, no parked cars running their engines, no loiterers looking at their phones too intently. The atmosphere was ordinary. I started pumping the gas, letting the mundane action anchor me. I watched the flow, feeling exposed, anticipating the arrival of the inevitable tail. Marcus would be operating with multiple teams. They would have a digital perimeter around major exit routes. Midway through filling the tank, I spotted him. He wasn't obvious. He was leaning against a dilapidated Ford pickup across the lot, pretending to scroll through his phone. Mid-30s, clean-cut, expensive boots, too fit for a typical local resident, and, crucially, he was looking at the ground, not at his phone. He was observing my reflection in the side of the pump. I recognized the type instantly, the peripheral observer, the one who establishes positive identification before the extraction team moves in. I continued pumping the gas, my movements deliberately slow, ignoring the man completely. My heart rate elevated instantly, but my external demeanor remained placid. I had anticipated this. Marcus was testing the waters. The man across the lot lifted his phone to his ear, his eyes flicking toward me again. He was making his report. I had about 3 minutes before reinforcements arrived. I calmly finished filling the tank, replaced the nozzle, and walked toward the payment shack. I made sure to walk past the dumpster, giving myself an extra few seconds of visual cover. As I entered the dimly lit shack, I caught the attendant watching a tiny, blurry television perched high on a shelf. $27.85, he mumbled without looking up. I placed 2 crisp 20s on the counter. While he made change, I spoke, not to him, but to the room. I need to use the washroom. Is it clean? Yeah, outside, round the back, he replied, handing me the change. I took the bills and, instead of walking out the front, I quickly slid into the cramped storage closet next to the counter. I didn't close the door, leaving a narrow crack. The man from the pickup was now walking toward the shack, looking too casual, too deliberate. He entered. Hey man, did you just see an older lady with dark hair? Yeah, she just went out back to the crapper, the attendant replied, pointing vaguely. The operative immediately headed for the back door, moving with quiet urgency. This was my moment. I slipped out of the storage closet, moving like a phantom. I did not go out the back. Instead, I moved quickly toward the front door, stopping just behind the entryway. The operative was now fully committed, checking around the corner of the shack. I reached inside the collar of my heavy jacket and pulled out a small, weighted steel cylinder, a modified, high-powered pepper spray canister, disguised as a keychain flashlight. I aimed. Not at his face, but at the rear tire of his Ford pickup. PFFFSD. A silent, controlled hiss of compressed air. I slid back into the sedan, starting the engine. I watched in the side mirror as the operative came around the back of the shack, realizing the bathroom was empty. He paused, frustration evident on his face. He checked the sedan spot. It was gone. He ran back to his pickup just as the tire began to deflate with a noticeable rush of air. He kicked the flat tire in pure, impotent rage. I had bought us maybe 30 minutes and confirmed that Marcus was using aggressive, professional surveillance. I merged onto the highway, heading south toward Portland. That was good, Grandma, Leo said from the back seat, his eyes shining with adrenaline. You used the blind spot. We use everything, Leo. Now, I said, my voice hardening, we talk about the coin. We need a strategy for the artifact. I reached over and flicked open the small console compartment. Inside was a tiny, older model Swiss Army knife with a precision flathead screwdriver blade. It's time you understood exactly what we are protecting. We drove for another hour, the dense urban sprawl of Portland beginning to color the horizon, a tapestry of concrete and steel rising from the gray landscape. The time was precious. I needed to move the chip before Marcus's net tightened again. The bad men want what's inside, I began, pulling back the grandmotherly veneer entirely. It's not gold, Leo. It's information. Very powerful information. I pulled over into the parking lot of a massive, empty church. Sunday services were long over, and the lot was quiet. I cut the engine and twisted in my seat to face him. I placed the steel scent and the tiny knife on the central console. "This is not a game, Leo. This is serious now. You need to know how to save yourself if I can't." He nodded gravely, his gaze fixed on the coin. I took the steel scent, noting its weight and the unique milling marks I had added 20 years ago. It was a perfect disguise. "This coin is hollow," I explained, demonstrating how I worked the precision blade into the narrow, almost invisible seam. The steel was hardened, designed to resist simple prying, but my blade found the weak point. With a soft, metallic click, the coin parted into two thin halves. Leo gasped. Nestled inside the tiny cavity, embedded in a thin layer of resin, was something microscopic, a dark, crystalline speck, barely visible to the naked eye. It was a sophisticated, self-encrypting data chip, smaller and far more advanced than anything available to the public. "This," I whispered, pointing to the chip, "is the data that gives people power over electricity. Over the entire country. If the bad men get this, they can turn off the lights, make the computers stop working, and cause big, big trouble." Leo didn't recoil. His eyes widened with professional curiosity, not childish fear. "And you hid it here?" "I built this coin. I built this protection." I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to soften the reality. "Leo, if they catch me, they will try to make me tell them where this is. And they will think I hid it somewhere else. But I have it," he stated firmly, holding out his hand. "Exactly. And you must not let them find it on you." I explained the mechanics of the chip. It wasn't just storage, it was also a limited-function transmitter, capable of sending a short, encrypted burst of data, the kill switch code for Project Mercury, to a single, long-disused emergency frequency, known only to Carlyle and one other agent. I showed him the minute pressure point on the chip that would activate the transmission. "If they find me, Leo, and you're hidden, you wait. If I do not return in 12 hours, you use the transmission. You push this button. Hard. What happens then?" "Then the information goes to a very old friend of mine. A good person. He will use it to stop the bad men, but it will expose me completely. It will end my quiet life forever. Do you understand? It's the last resort." His young face hardened with resolve. "I understand, Grandma. You go out, I send the message." He picked up the two halves of the coin and the chip. "I need to hide it better than this," he stated. This was the Leo the First had trained, analytical, precise, and utterly committed. We spent the next 10 minutes discussing practical hiding places for a tiny, microscopic object. Not in a shoe or a pocket, too obvious. Not in his mouth, too risky. "We need something they won't even think to check on a 10-year-old, I mused. Leo's eyes landed on the small, colorful loom band bracelet he wore on his wrist, a gift from a girl at school. "This," he said. "The knot is thick." It took careful work with the tiny screwdriver, but we managed to pry open a few millimeters of the brightly colored plastic band. We sealed the chip inside the dense rubber knot, using a tiny drop of superglue from the car's emergency kit. The coin halves were returned to the oilcloth and secured in my bag. The microchip was now literally glued to my grandson's wrist, hidden in plain sight. Marcus could strip search him and never find it. "Good job, Leo," I said, a wave of genuine relief washing over me. "You are protecting the world." The act was complete. Leo was now armed, not with a weapon, but with the ultimate countermeasure. He was no longer just the boy I was protecting. He was my operational redundancy. "Now," I said, putting the car into gear, "we need to find someone who can help us fight fire with fire." I needed to make contact with my former analyst, the man I had trusted implicitly, Carlyle. But Carlyle was dead. His network, however, was not. I needed to find Carlyle's shadow, Carlyle. The name was different, but the methodology was the same. We headed straight toward the chaotic heart of Portland, toward the places where ghosts of the past sometimes linger. We arrived in Portland mid-afternoon. The transition from the isolated serenity of the mountains to the buzzing, indifferent noise of the city was jarring. I checked us into a chain motel on the outskirts, paying in cash for a single night, using a fake name, Helen Davies, and an old, discarded ID. I chose a room on the third floor, facing the highway, allowing me to monitor the parking lot. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. "Rest, Leo," I instructed, pulling the thick, blackout curtains shut. "I need you awake and sharp in a few hours." He collapsed instantly onto the worn bedspread, exhaustion finally overpowering adrenaline. For me, rest was impossible. The adrenaline was now laced with a creeping, pervasive paranoia. Marcus knew my methods. He knew my weaknesses. He had successfully anticipated two of my moves. Where would he strike next? I set up my temporary communication post in the bathroom, the only room with a lockable door. I pulled out the burner phone, a clunky, prepaid device purchased years ago for just this contingency. I needed Carlisle. My contact in Seattle had told me that Carlisle's old analytic network was now maintained by a former analyst who went by the operational name Carlisle. No one knew the real name, just the number and the legendary competence. Dialing the encrypted number felt like reaching across a vast chasm of time. The line rang 3 times, then connected with a burst of static. "Status." A low, synthesized voice answered. No preamble, no greetings. "Initiate protocol Phoenix, 7. Vance," I replied, using my old, decommissioned code. A pause that felt like an eternity. "Vance is ghosted. Verify Phoenix, 7 criteria," the voice demanded. "Artifact 43 is active. Perimeter breached by Bell." I repeat, Bell is active and tracking. The synthesized voice changed slightly, losing some of its mechanical quality, implying recognition. "Alara. I thought you were gardening." "The garden is gone, Carlisle. I need intelligence." "Marcus Bell. Everything you have on his current operational matrix." "Bell is not chasing ghosts, Vance. He's running Ares Global Security, a legitimate billion-dollar enterprise. He controls surveillance contracts for 3 states. Finding him is easy. Staying away from him is the problem." "Where is he based? And what does he call the chip now?" "Headquarters is downtown Seattle, a fortress. He's calling the chip the Genesis key. He's been moving corporate assets aggressively for 2 months, liquidating accounts, preparing for a hostile takeover, not of a company, but of infrastructure." My fear solidified into cold certainty. "He's ready to use it, Carlisle. He's going to finish the job I started. And you think hiding in a motel room is going to stop him?" The directness stung. "I'm not hiding. I'm repositioning. I need to know why he didn't grab the chip at the cabin. He left the tea, Carlisle. He knew I was there." Carlisle processed the information instantly. "He left a marker. He wanted to confirm the location, but more importantly, he wanted to confirm your state of mind. He knows you won't expose the artifact unless absolutely necessary. He's trying to force you into a corner where your operational principles force you to reveal the location. He thinks I'll run to an extraction point." "Exactly. But he's methodical. He won't personally engage until he knows the artifact is secure. He will send cleanup." "Cleanup," I repeated, the word tasting like rust. "Alara, you need to move to ground zero and use your advantage. He thinks you're on the defensive. But you know his tactical blind spots better than anyone. He still operates on the assumption that you betrayed him for money. He never understood your conscience." I ended the call abruptly. Carlisle's words echoed in the cramped, damp bathroom. "He never understood your conscience." Marcus was counting on me to be predictable, to run to the next safe house, to call an extraction, to play the weak victim. But he had fundamentally misunderstood the last 20 years. I hadn't spent that time growing weaker. I had spent it cultivating patience, invisibility, and a deep, intimate understanding of the life I walked away from. I returned to the main room. Leo was still deeply asleep. I pulled open my bag and extracted the piece of metal wrapped in oilcloth. It was heavy and cold in my hand. Not a weapon, but the memory of a weapon. A titanium rod, about 6 inches long, with a knurled grip. I had used it once to disarm a specialist in Rome. I slipped it into the waistband of my jeans, covered by my oversized sweater. I looked at Leo's small wrist, hidden under the blanket, protecting the world's most sensitive data. Marcus wasn't looking for Alara Vance, the grandmother. He was looking for Evelyn Thorne, the ghost who betrayed him. I smiled, a cold, thin line forming on my lips. It was time to give him what he wanted. but on my terms. I wasn't running to a safe house. I was running toward the confrontation. I would move us into the deepest, most chaotic part of the city, where only ghosts thrive. I needed a distraction, an opportunity, and a vehicle that could withstand more than a flat tire. I needed Pitt, my old logistics and demolitions expert. And he was somewhere in the gritty, industrial heart of Portland. My last volatile ally. Portland. Mid-afternoon. Instead of seeking quiet, I plunged us into the deepest part of the urban chaos, the downtown core, specifically, a massive shopping center near the Willamette River. Marcus would be using digital fences, tracking cell towers, monitoring financial activity. The chaos of consumerism was the perfect camouflage. Thousands of people, all running predictable patterns, using phones and credit cards, we were statistical noise. I pulled into the multi-level parking garage. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the sound of muffled holiday music, a discordant sensory overload that was strangely comforting. "We are shopping, Leo," I instructed, handing him a baseball cap and pulling my own hat low. "We are looking for clothes and shoes." Act completely bored. Leo, still tired but energized by the risk, played the part perfectly. We entered the mall, moving with the crowd, observing the flow. My goal was to disappear completely from any potential facial recognition system that Marcus's corporation might have access to. First, we hit a generic clothing store. I bought 2 cheap, identical tracksuits, one for me, one for Leo, in an unmemorable shade of charcoal gray. I paid in small bills, breaking the 20s I had received from the gas station attendant. Next, the shoe store. Generic, comfortable sneakers. We changed in the tiny, hot changing room, stuffing our old, identifiable clothes into the bottom of the shopping bags. We had just achieved a total wardrobe change, obscuring height, silhouette, and color, the basic requirements for quick visual tracking. As we walked past a kiosk selling novelty items, Leo suddenly tugged my sleeve, pointing to the reflection in a glass display case. 2 o'clock, Grandma. Brown jacket. Scanning. I didn't turn my head, but adjusted my pace. The man in the brown jacket, a professional, clearly talking into a hidden earpiece, was not shopping. He was performing a slow, methodical grid search. He had missed us during the clothing change, but he was closing in on the area of my last known phone ping. I smiled inwardly. Marcus hadn't deployed the full extraction team yet. He was still relying on surveillance and identification. "We need to lose him now," I murmured. "Find a crowd. Fast." I spotted our opportunity, the food court, swarming with teenagers and weekend shoppers. I moved us not toward the exit, but toward the central column of the food court, near the entrance to the children's play area. "Listen carefully, Leo. When I give the signal, you run to the nearest exit and wait exactly 5 minutes, then head to the bus station 2 blocks over. If I'm not there, you move to Plan B, got it?" He nodded, his jaw set. I pulled out the tiny, modified pepper spray cylinder that had flattened the tire. But this time, I wasn't using it on a vehicle. I moved quickly toward a large, heavily decorated column near the center of the food court, a pillar covered in laminated posters advertising discounts and deals. The operative in the brown jacket was 30 feet behind us, cutting through the crowd. I pressed myself against the column, pulled out a stack of loose bills from my pocket, and, with a subtle movement, deployed the canister, not the pepper spray, but the secondary feature, a burst of compressed air and metallic glitter, designed to emulate the sound of a small, sharp pop and look like an electrical short. I dropped the bills right at my feet and let out a piercing scream. Fire! Fire! Electrical fire! The sound was instantly amplified by the hard acoustics of the food court. In the chaotic world of a mall, people don't think. They panic. The moment the glitter scattered and the sound rang out, a small, immediate stampede began. People stumbled over the scattered money. "Go, Leo!" I shouted. Leo was gone instantly, blending with the stream of confused shoppers heading toward the escalators. The operative in the brown jacket froze, momentarily disoriented by the chaos and the glittering debris. He saw me, the old woman shouting about fire, but his target, the small boy, had just vanished into the rush. I took the opportunity to dive into a crowded department store, using the racks of evening gowns and display mannequins as cover. I ditched the shopping bags, keeping only my purse and the essential items in my pockets. I emerged a minute later near a different entrance, completely calm, merging with the exiting stream of shoppers who were just discovering the false alarm. I walked quickly, but not running, toward the city bus station. The flank was successful. The operative now had to deal with a sprawling, compromised grid and a chaotic extraction scene, all while realizing his two targets had split up. I found Leo waiting patiently on a bench at the bus station, reading a discarded newspaper, his hat pulled low. He looked like any other kid waiting for his ride home. "Well done, partner," I said, sitting beside him. "We are statistically invisible now. But we need a physical buffer. Something loud, reliable, and entirely off the grid." "Pit?" Leo asked, folding the newspaper neatly. "Pit," I confirmed. "And he's not going to like it." Pit was my last resort. Volatile, brilliant, and completely allergic to the life. I was about to ask him to reopen a door he had slammed shut 2 decades ago. The cost of that favor would be high, but I needed his help to prepare for the final confrontation with Marcus. The bus ride was long, rattling through the industrial outskirts of Portland. We disembarked near a sprawling complex of derelict warehouses and humming factories, the air heavy with the smell of motor oil and burnt rubber. This was Pitt's domain. Pete Kowalski. Former demolition specialist, current owner of an independent, cash-only auto repair and fabrication shop, Pitt stopped performance. He was my contemporary, about 68 now, a man whose face was a map of bad decisions and hard-won loyalty. The shop was a metal hangar, loud and greasy. Inside, Pitt was wrestling with the engine block of a massive pickup truck, his face smeared with grease, his arms corded and strong. He hadn't aged well. His hair was sparse, his clothes were ripped, but his eyes, when he looked up, were the same sharp, dangerous blue I remembered. The moment he saw me walk into the garage bay, holding the hand of a small boy, the wrench in his hand dropped with a deafening clang. "Alara." His voice was a rusty rasp. "You look like hell. And you promised me, on the sacred ground of that retirement cake, that I would never see you again." "Hello, Pitt," I said simply. He wiped his hands on a greasy rag, his movements slow and deliberate, sizing up the threat I represented. He looked at Leo, then back at me. "He yours?" "My grandson, Leo. He knows the rules." Pitt grunted, folding his arms across his massive chest. "Rules? You dragged a kid into that life? After everything we did to get out?" "He was born into it, Pitt. I just taught him how to survive it." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Phoenix 7 is active. Artifact 43 is compromised. Bell is tracking us." The color drained from his already pale face. The operational codes Phoenix 7, Artifact 43 were keys that only a handful of people still possessed. No, Alara. You told me the data was gone. 20 years. 20 damn years of tuning engines and staying sober. He jabbed a finger toward the massive metal door. "Get out. I'm clean. I'm retired. Bell knows my patterns, Pitt. He knew where I would run. He's closing the perimeter digitally. If I stay on the move, he'll catch us." I opened my bag and placed the oil-wrapped steel scent halves on his workbench. "He's looking for this. I need a ghost car, Pitt. Untraceable, rebuilt, and fast. And I need information. Where would Bell base his forward operations for a local pursuit?" Pitt stared at the coin, the sight of the artifact dragging him back into the shadows. His chest heaved. "You're asking me to break every rule I established for my own damn survival, Alara. You're asking me to risk federal charges and a visit from Bell's cleanup crew. I'm asking you to protect the power grid, Pitt. Bell isn't just looking for money, he's looking for control. He wants to finish Project Mercury." That struck him. Pitt was many things: cynical, angry, self-serving, but he wasn't a traitor to the larger cause. He knew the potential catastrophe of Mercury better than anyone. He sighed heavily, the fight draining out of him, replaced by the grim determination of duty. "Fine. You owe me, Alara. You owe me 20 years of peace." He turned to Leo, his expression softening slightly. You good with a wrench, kid? Leo, recognizing the shift in alliance, brightened. I can follow instructions. Good. You're going to help me rebuild your grandmother's ride. Pitt walked to the far corner of the hangar, where a dilapidated, matte black 1980s station wagon sat, covered in dust. It looked like junk, but I knew better. It was an operative's special project. The car is almost done. I need 3 hours to finalize the encryption and reinforce the plates. And you, Alara, are going to use my landline to make a very restricted, very fast call. While Pitt and Leo began the meticulous work of reinforcing the car, Leo passing tools with astonishing accuracy, I went to Pitt's office, a cramped space filled with ancient wiring schematics and stale coffee. I used Pitt's encrypted landline to call Carlisle. I'm in Portland. I need Bell's old operational base, the one he ran out of during the '95 timber fraud case. Why there, Alara? That place is derelict. It's the closest thing to home base he'll use. It's geographically perfect for controlling the Seattle-Portland corridor, and he knows I know it. He'll expect me to run away from it. I'm running to it. Carlisle hesitated. Coordinates sent. It's an abandoned shipping terminal, Pier 47. Hazardous materials warning. It's been empty for 15 years. Perfect. Bell likes his privacy. I hung up. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Running was over. I had to face Marcus Bell, and I had to do it on terrain I knew, using the chaos he hadn't anticipated. I walked back into the garage. Pitt was welding a piece of steel plate onto the undercarriage of the station wagon. Sparks flew, illuminating the sweat on his brow. 3 hours, Alara, he yelled over the sound of the grinder. And then you burn down your world, or you save it. Your choice. The choice was already made. The piece was already burned. Now it was time for the fire. The station wagon, now officially named the Quiet Vigil by Pitt, a cynical nod to my years of suburban pretense, was ready. It looked utterly unremarkable, dull black, scratched paint, the perfect embodiment of a neglected, forgotten vehicle. Underneath the hood, however, Pitt had installed a heavily modified engine, shielded wiring, and reinforced suspension. It was a tank in civilian clothing. Pitt handed me the keys, his expression grim. It's fast. It's heavy. It's got a bypass chip installed to fool any local speed cameras. Use it wisely, Alara. Thank you, Pitt. You saved us. No, he corrected sharply. I gave you the tools to save yourselves. Don't confuse the two. And don't you dare die on me. I hate owing people favors, and if you die, I'll never get my 20 years of peace back. I nodded, understanding the depth of his reluctant loyalty. We said our goodbyes. Leo embraced Pitt, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. Pitt handed Leo a brand new, expensive multi-tool. If you ever need a hiding place, kid, the mountains are always the safest bet. Stay sharp. Leo strapped himself into the back seat. As we pulled out of the industrial park, heading toward the derelict docks of Pier 47, the tension in the car was palpable. I drove slower now, deliberately meditative. We had gone from flight to offensive posture. The moment of decision had arrived. Marcus Bell was expecting evasion. He was expecting me to call in a third party, CIA, FBI, or even an international organization, to handle the artifact. He was counting on my morality, my deep-seated aversion to violence after my daughter was born, to keep me running until I was cornered. But he had miscalculated. The threat to Leo changed the equation. If I surrendered the artifact, Marcus would have the power he craved, and he would eliminate us instantly to cover his tracks. If I activated the transmission on the microchip, the data would be safe, but the fallout would be catastrophic. The revelation of Project Mercury would cause a global panic, financial collapse, and expose me completely, turning me into a target for every shadowy organization involved in the initial scheme. My life, and potentially Chloe's, would be permanently jeopardized. There was only one path left: neutralization. I had to confront Marcus, not to kill him, but to capture him and secure enough evidence to dismantle his corporate empire and legally bury him. But I was 72. He was likely surrounded by his professional security detail. I was facing an operational fortress with only my skills, an old friend's souped-up station wagon, and a 10-year-old backup plan. Conscience versus survival. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were aged, spotted, the joints stiff from years of pruning roses and knitting. But they were steady. My mind went back to the look in Marcus's eyes in that Zurich safe house, not evil, but absolute, chilling self-justification. He saw himself as the ultimate necessary player. He believed the world needed him to hold the power. I had to remove him from the board. Permanently, but cleanly. "Leo," I spoke, the silence broken only by the low growl of the rebuilt engine. "Yes, Grandma. We are going to a very dark, very quiet place. This is the last stop. I need you to promise me something. Anything. When we arrive, I am going to leave you with the phone, the coordinates, and the exact instructions for Plan B. If you hear anything at all, that sounds like a serious fight, you do not come looking for me. You leave the car and you run to the backup coordinates Pitt gave us." I pulled out the burner phone and placed it in his hand. "You have the number for Carlisle. If I don't contact you by midnight, you call him, tell him the situation, and then you activate the chip. Do you understand the severity of this? You're going in alone, aren't you? It has to be this way, darling. No witnesses. No collateral damage. This is my fight." He looked down at the phone, then up at me, his eyes full of adult sorrow. "Don't come back a ghost, Grandma." The words pierced the wall of my professional resolve. "Don't come back a ghost." "I won't, Leo. I promise." We pulled onto the desolate access road leading to Pier 47. The air was colder here, smelling of salt and decaying industrial waste. The massive, concrete structures of the abandoned docks loomed ahead, silent and menacing, a perfect theater for the final act. I stopped the car exactly where the shadows were deepest, next to a mountain of rusting shipping containers. "Time to go, Leo. Wait here. Be silent. Be invisible. Be my eyes." He didn't argue. He knew his role. I slipped out of the car, the cool evening air immediately wrapping around me. I reached inside my waistband, touching the cold, smooth metal of the titanium rod. It wasn't a gun, but in my hands, it was far more precise. The grandmother was gone. The ghost had returned. Pier 47 was a sprawling graveyard of abandoned industry. Massive, rusted cranes stood silhouetted against the weak twilight, monuments to a departed age. The facility, once a hub of maritime commerce, was now perfectly silent, save for the rhythmic slosh of the tide against the rotting pilings. I moved with the internalized grace I hadn't used in 2 decades. Every step was measured, silent. I used the containers as cover, keeping low, letting the long, jagged shadows obscure my movements. Marcus needed a base that offered both anonymity and defensibility. Pier 47, with its natural barriers and limited access points, was ideal. His presence wasn't announced by flashy security, it was implied by the utter lack of natural decay. The gravel was too raked, the rust too clean, the single chain-link fence too perfectly intact. I paused behind a stack of blue containers, retrieving a small, industrial endoscope from my jacket pocket, a device Pitt had tucked into my bag. I extended the fiber optic wire, slipping the tiny camera lens under the main gate. The inside yard was quiet. No visible guards. But the large warehouse at the center of the pier had a single light burning in a second-floor window. Headquarters. I withdrew the scope. Marcus was inviting me in. This wasn't a hidden base, it was a prepared stage. He knew I was coming. I needed to disable his surveillance systems without alerting him to the breach. I circled the perimeter, searching for the power source. Bell would never trust local power. He would have his own generator, likely shielded. I found it humming quietly behind the warehouse, a military-grade diesel unit, protected by a steel cage. My old operational rule: never kill the power, blind the perception. I pulled a small, tightly wrapped explosive charge from my pocket, another gift from Pitt, disguised as a roll of electrical tape. It wasn't designed to destroy the generator, but to fry the sensor inputs running from it. I placed the charge carefully on the main junction box, setting the timer for 5 minutes. The flash and sound would be minimal, designed only to disrupt the current flow. Click, 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 click. for minutes remaining. I didn't wait. I moved toward the weakest point of the warehouse, the loading dock. The metal door was heavy, but the locking mechanism was old and poorly maintained. An assumption bell would make about a derelict site. I used a specially designed shim to manipulate the pins inside the industrial lock. It took 30 seconds of meticulous, quiet pressure. The moment the lock clicked open, the charge timer hit 0. A muffled whump sounded from the back of the building, followed by a soft, almost inaudible pop of frying circuits. Inside the warehouse, I saw a flicker as the backup power instantly kicked in, stabilizing the light upstairs. Marcus would know the power was tampered with, but he wouldn't know exactly what was hit. He would assume the perimeter sensors were offline. I slid through the gap, pulling the heavy door closed behind me. The air inside was stale and freezing. The space was enormous, dusty, filled with shadows cast by the high industrial windows. I moved toward the staircase, keeping to the edge of the room. My heart was beating a steady, professional rhythm. I wasn't scared, I was focused. The decades of comfortable routine had not blunted the muscle memory. Every fiber of my being recognized the geometry of threat. I reached the bottom of the steel staircase. It was loud, designed to carry sound. I would not use it. Instead, I looked up. The ventilation shaft, large enough for a maintenance worker, ran directly past the second-floor office. I found a stack of old pallets, scaled them silently, and used the grip of my titanium rod to pry open the rusted access panel to the shaft. The metal groaned slightly, but the noise was swallowed by the high ceilings. I slipped inside. The shaft was narrow, smelling of old dust and dry metal. I crawled forward on my elbows and knees, the cold steel biting into my aging joints. This was the final approach. I was no longer Alara Vance, the concerned grandmother. I was Evelyn Thorne, the ghost who walked through walls, the specialist Marcus thought he could control. I reached the vent above the office door. I could hear the faint sound of voices, one speaking, one listening. Marcus was not alone. I was ready for the encounter. But first, I had to confirm his identity and ensure that my actions would not result in an immediate, chaotic firefight. I needed evidence, not just justice. I needed to bury him legally. I retrieved a tiny, low-light camera from my bag, preparing to slip it through the vent slats. Marcus was waiting. And now, I was above him. I carefully pushed the small camera lens through the slats of the ventilation grid. The office below was sparsely furnished, a large steel desk, 2 industrial chairs, and several large screens displaying satellite images and complex corporate logistics data. And there he was, Marcus Bell. He hadn't changed much, aging like expensive, hardwood leaner, colder, his silver hair neatly slicked back. He wore a crisp, dark suit that looked incongruous against the dirty backdrop of the warehouse. He wasn't alone. Standing rigidly near the door was a younger man, bulky and expressionless, the cleanup crew. The muscle. Marcus was pacing, talking into a high-end speakerphone resting on his desk. No, she didn't use any known exit strategy. She's too disciplined. The decoy in the mall confirmed she's operating offensively now. She ditched the car near the docks. She knows Pier 47. He paused, listening to the crackling response from the phone. The boy? No, they split. The boy is the key, the old woman is the weapon. I want the area saturated. I want eyes on every transport depot and bus station. She's trying to call in favors. Find the contacts. I aimed the camera, recording every word. The evidence was accumulating. Marcus ended the call, slamming the phone down. He looked up toward the ceiling, directly at the vent, and an involuntary tremor ran through me. Had he heard me? No. His gaze was distant, calculating. She's close, Damien, Marcus said to the cleanup man. She thinks she can dismantle Ares Global from the inside. She thinks she can expose Project Mercury. Damien remained silent. Marcus scoffed, running a hand through his hair. She still has that damnable conscience, Damien. 20 years ago, she could have killed me. She could have sold the chip to a rival state. But she ran. She ran to protect her morality. That's her weakness. He walked to the window, looking out over the dark docks. She'll try to neutralize me and take the evidence. She won't come in guns blazing. She's here for the truth. I had to move now. He had anticipated my method, but he hadn't anticipated my exact point of entry. I retracted the camera and carefully began to unscrew the vent cover. The bolts were rusted and fought me, but the titanium rod provided excellent leverage. I worked in complete silence, focusing only on the metal straining against the threads. When the last bolt was loose, I gently lowered the metal grill onto the desk below. It landed with a soft, almost imperceptible thud on a stack of files. Marcus and Damien turned instantly. I dropped out of the shaft, landing soundlessly on the desk, the titanium rod extended. I was standing directly over Marcus Bell, the shock of my abrupt appearance freezing him in place. The element of surprise was complete. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice low and dry after the long silence, the voice of Evelyn Thorne, not Alara Vance. Marcus recovered instantly, his eyes narrow with cold fury. "Alara. Or should I call you Vance? I knew you couldn't stay away from the fire you started." Damien started to move, reaching inside his jacket. "Don't, Damien," I warned, my gaze fixed on Marcus. "This is a meeting between partners. You're collateral." I didn't wait for him to comply. I spun off the desk, using my momentum to deliver a sharp, precise blow with the rod against the pressure point in Damien's collarbone. The move was designed to paralyze, not kill. Damien gasped, his arms seizing up, the gun still holstered. He collapsed heavily against the wall, clutching his shoulder, temporarily neutralized. Marcus watched the rapid violence with a chilling mix of shock and admiration. "Still fast. Good." He walked slowly toward me, placing his hands flat on the desk. "Where's the key, Alara? You came all this way. End the game." "The game ended when you threatened my grandson, Marcus. I didn't come to argue. I came to secure the evidence and shut you down." "Evidence?" He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "I am Ares Global. I am untouchable. You are a 70-year-old woman breaking and entering a private facility. You are a domestic terrorist, Alara. I am the person who knows where every one of your illegal assets is stored, Marcus. And I know the true purpose of the Genesis key." I gestured to the computer screen displaying the logistics data. "You've liquidated funds, you've moved key personnel, you've synchronized your system to the national grid in advance. You were going to activate the full Mercury system tonight, weren't you?" He smiled, a triumphant, awful smile. "I was going to stabilize the future, Alara. Power cannot be left to chaotic markets. It needs a firm hand. My hand. Give me the artifact, and I'll let you walk away. I'll give you back your garden. You can't give me back 20 years, Marcus. And I won't give you the ability to end the world." The conversation was pointless. The time for words was over. I needed to move before Damien recovered. I activated the hidden function on the titanium rod. It split into two smaller, weighted pieces, perfect for controlling leverage and strikes. "Where is the chip, Alara?" Marcus roared, his civilized demeanor finally cracking. "It's safe," I replied, stepping back toward the main warehouse floor. "And if you want it, you'll have to come and take it." I was leading him out of the sterile office and into the chaos of the warehouse floor, my turf. I had anticipated this move years ago. The office was designed for talk, the warehouse for war. I backed down the steel stairs, not using the treads, but sliding along the railing, landing lightly on the concrete floor below. Marcus, fueled by rage and desperation, came charging out of the office, ignoring his injured security guard. "Get back here, Alara," he shouted. The warehouse was dark, vast, and perfect. The flickering backup lights cast long, distorted shadows, creating visual uncertainty, my most valuable ally. Marcus stopped at the foot of the stairs, peering into the gloom. He was faster than I remembered, but he lacked the agility and the operational reflexes honed by years of active fieldwork. He was a corporate executive now, accustomed to commanding, not fighting. "You think this dark place makes you safe?" Marcus called out. "I built this game, Alara. I know every corner of it. You built the game 20 years ago, Marcus." "I've been refining the escape route ever since," I replied, my voice echoing off the concrete. I moved behind a large stack of abandoned machinery, making sure I couldn't be easily flanked. Marcus pulled a small, sleek firearm from his waistband, a high-caliber pistol, expensive and heavy. The chip is useless to you now. It's a liability. You're retired. Give it up. I'm not retired, Marcus. I was simply waiting for the final assignment. I needed to disarm him, and I needed to do it without creating enough noise to bring in outside interference or fully awaken Damien. I used the titanium rods not as weapons, but as sound generators. I struck the side of a rusted boiler drum with the metal, creating a high-pitched, echoing clang. Marcus flinched, momentarily blinded by the sudden acoustic shock. He swung his gun wildly toward the sound. I used the distraction to sprint low across the floor, moving toward a cluster of heavy chains hanging from a hoist mechanism. You're getting slow, Marcus. I taunted, ensuring my voice came from a different direction than the last sound. He fired 2 rounds toward the new sound. The shots roared, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the warehouse. The rounds buried themselves harmlessly into the concrete wall, ricocheting nothing but dust. He was losing his professional edge, relying on brute force rather than strategy. I reached the hoist chains. Using the momentum, I swung out into the center of the warehouse, moving toward the ceiling. She's above you. Damien's voice, now strained, shouted from the stairwell. He was recovering. Marcus tracked me, firing another shot. The bullet whizzed past my shoulder, ripping a shower of sparks from the chain. I swung again, reaching a point directly above an old maintenance access panel on the floor. As I released the chains, I dropped the 2 titanium rods precisely onto the panel. Clang! Clang! The impact activated the mechanism I had discovered during my earlier reconnaissance, a legacy system, designed by Pitt years ago when this was a training ground, activated by a specific, heavy vibration. A section of the concrete floor immediately opened, not downward, but sideways, revealing a dark, flooded maintenance trench beneath. Marcus, sprinting toward the noise, didn't see the floor move. He fell instantly, disappearing with a massive splash into the cold, black water of the trench. The sound of his pistol hitting the water was muffled and final. I landed silently on the edge of the opening. The stench of stagnant water and oil rose up. Marcus was sputtering, struggling in the narrow, flooded ditch. He was soaked, his expensive suit dragging him down, his rage momentarily replaced by sheer panic. Elara. Damn you, he coughed, trying to grasp the concrete edge. Damien, seeing his boss neutralized, finally had his gun drawn and was aiming toward the opening. I had anticipated the muscle. Before Damien could fire, I reached into my jacket and threw the last of Pitt's gifts, a modified smoke grenade, rigged to deploy instantaneously and non-lethally. The grenade exploded against the concrete 10 feet from Damien, releasing a thick, white cloud of non-toxic, highly irritating smoke that instantly filled the ground floor. Damien began to cough violently, his aim ruined, his position compromised. I didn't waste time on him. I knelt by the trench, looking down at Marcus. The game is over, Marcus, I stated calmly. You lose. He looked up at me, water dripping from his face, defeat visible in his eyes. He realized I hadn't come for revenge. I had come for tactical victory. I had neutralized the threat, secured the location, and blinded the cleanup crew. The physical fight was done. Now, the final, crucial choice remained. I knelt at the edge of the maintenance trench, the acrid, irritant smoke swirling around me, choking the sounds of Damien's retching coughs. Below, Marcus struggled in the freezing, oily water, his body shuddering from the cold and the shock of his fall. His expensive watch glinted faintly beneath the water's surface. He was completely helpless. I had the advantage. I had the power. I had the choice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the titanium rod, assembling it back into its full, heavy length. The rod was cold, a perfect conduit for the icy resolve flooding my system. I looked down at the man who had stolen 2 decades of my life and jeopardized my family's safety. He was a threat that would never truly disappear. If I let him live, he would find a way to escape, rebuild, and return the pursuit. That was Marcus's nature. My fingers tightened around the rod. One precise blow to the head, and the threat would be permanently eradicated. It would be self-defense. It would be final. It would ensure the absolute safety of Leo and Chloe. I raised the rod, the movement slow and deliberate, watching the panic rise in Marcus's eyes. "Do it, Elara," he spat, resigned but defiant. "You always were the executioner." The word echoed in the empty warehouse. Executioner. I saw not the desperate man in the ditch, but the younger man in Zurich, full of misplaced idealism and terrifying ambition. And I saw myself, the ghost, the operative, the woman who had already sacrificed her soul to the cause. If I struck him now, I would destroy the last remnants of Elara Vance. I would cement my status as a killer, confirming Marcus's core belief that I was nothing more than a glorified assassin, a ghost fueled by violence. And I had promised Leo that I wouldn't return as a ghost. My conscience, the weakness Marcus had banked on, surged back, stronger than 20 years of silence. It wasn't about letting him go, it was about defining who I was now. I was a protector, not an executioner. I lowered the rod slowly, gripping it tightly until my knuckles turned white. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the coughing fit of Damien. "I don't need to kill you. I need to dismantle you." I reached over the edge and snatched the speakerphone that had fallen from his desk, still linked to his corporate network. I also grabbed the high-caliber pistol Marcus had dropped into the trench. It was soaked, useless for firing, but heavy and menacing. I used the titanium rod to wedge the pistol into the machinery above the trench, pointing it directly at Marcus's submerged shoulder. "If you move, the gun falls. It's a clean shot into your clavicle. And if you shout, Damien will assume I'm killing you, and he'll panic and run." Marcus glared, understanding the cold, tactical brilliance of the threat. He remained still, shivering violently. I stood up, ignoring Damien, who was now crawling blindly through the smoke, attempting to find his way to the door. I grabbed Marcus's laptop from the desk, still logged into the Ares global server. I worked quickly, typing commands I hadn't used in years, navigating through layers of corporate encryption. I located the hidden files, the financial ledgers, and the communication matrix, proving his attempts to manipulate the power grid. I transferred a massive data package, every piece of incriminating evidence, onto a heavily encrypted flash drive I'd pulled from my bag. The data dump complete, I picked up the speakerphone again, making sure the connection was still active to his corporate security director, who was likely still listening, confused by the sudden silence. "Security Director," I announced into the phone, using a loud, clear, authoritative voice. "This is Vance. Your CEO, Marcus Bell, is currently neutralized and being held for federal authorities at Pier 47. You will immediately cease all active surveillance, shut down all Project Mercury asset synchronization, and prepare for a full takeover by law enforcement." I paused for effect, letting the weight of the command settle. "If you move one asset, or if you interfere with my departure, this evidence goes live to every major news outlet in the country, detailing your corporation's involvement in economic terrorism." I slammed the speakerphone back onto the desk. I looked down at Marcus. He was defeated, not by death, but by exposure. "You wanted to be the balance of power, Marcus. Now you'll be the example." I left him there, trapped and exposed. I pulled out the burner phone and quickly dialed a local, non-emergency police number. "I need to report a serious situation at Pier 47, an abandoned shipping terminal. I suspect corporate espionage and possible weapons violations. The CEO of Ares Global Security is currently incapacitated inside the main warehouse. Send a tactical team. Tell them to bring evidence bags." I hung up, the clean resolution settling over me. I hadn't succumbed to the violence of the past. I had used my skills to achieve justice and safety, not revenge. I moved silently to the loading dock door. Damien was still coughing violently in the smoke. I slipped outside into the crisp, cold air of the docks, leaving the chaos to unfold behind me. I looked at the warehouse, now a beacon of controlled disaster. The ghost had done her work. I ran back toward the shadowed stack of shipping containers where Leo was waiting in the quiet vigil. It was time to go home. A different home. The drive back to Pitt's auto shop was slow and agonizingly meticulous. I drove with the disciplined calm of someone who has just walked away from a detonated bomb, knowing the shockwaves are still coming. I pulled the quiet vigil into the back bay of Pitt's garage, the reinforced tires crunching softly on the gravel. I cut the engine. Leo emerged instantly from the back seat, his eyes wide and searching. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked the only question that mattered. The treasure map? I reached into my pocket, pulling out the encrypted flash drive and the two halves of the steel cent. The map is safe, and the bad man is neutralized. He exhaled a long, shaky breath of relief, the tension draining from his small frame. He looked at the flash drive. What now? Now, we send the message. We went into Pitt's office. He was sitting at his cluttered desk, pretending to read a trade magazine, but his gaze was fixed on the sound of the engine. You're alive, he stated, his voice flat. Thanks to your car and your supplies, Pitt. I placed the flash drive on the desk. Marcus Bell is in custody. His corporate assets are exposed. Project Mercury is dead. Pitt stared at the drive, then at me. You didn't kill him. No. I secured the evidence. I left the police a clear, anonymous trail. He's going down for corporate espionage and attempted infrastructure sabotage. Cleanly. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Pitt's face. Atta girl, Alara. You always hated getting your hands dirty unnecessarily. I accessed Pitt's secure computer, inserting the flash drive. The data was immense, Bell's entire illicit history. I dialed Carlisle's encrypted line again. Carlisle. Vance. I have Genesis key data, complete operational exposure on Marcus Bell and Ares Global. Full corporate files, financial logs, and a recording of his confession. I'm receiving encrypted transmission now, Carlisle confirmed. I need you to sanitize the data, remove any reference to my old operational existence, remove the identity of my associate here, and then I need you to leak it. I want a controlled detonation. I want the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the FBI's Internal Corruption Unit to all get it simultaneously. Midnight, Pacific Time. Understood. This is a clean kill, Alara. You have saved thousands of lives and probably stabilized the entire energy market. I saved my life, Carlisle. And my grandson's. Now my past is finally buried. Don't contact me again. I disconnected the line and physically destroyed the flash drive, breaking the circuit board with the heel of my boot. Pitt poured 3 mugs of stale, lukewarm coffee, one for him, one for me, and a diluted one for Leo. A celebratory gesture. So, what happens next? Pitt asked, nursing his coffee. I disappear, Pitt. Permanently. I can't go back to the garden. That house is compromised. Marcus knows the address, and even if he's in prison, his people are still out there. You burn the bridges? No, Pitt. I already burned them years ago. Now, I'm just cutting the life raft loose. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to the suburban house just long enough to collect Chloe. And then, we had to vanish completely, leaving no digital or physical trail. I need one more favor, Pitt. I need you to be my intermediary. If anything goes wrong with the leak, or if Marcus attempts to retaliate, I need you to use this number to contact Chloe's office. It's an emergency code. I scribbled a set of numbers on a greasy napkin. Pitt looked at the napkin, then tucked it into his pocket without a word. Go. And stay gone, Alara. Build something real this time. We left Pitt's garage, leaving the battleground of the past behind. The world felt cleaner, sharper, though infinitely more dangerous. I was no longer running from the truth. I was running with it, knowing that my quiet life was over, but my new life, a life of honest, open vigilance, was about to begin. But first, I had to face Chloe. And that, I knew, would be harder than facing Marcus Bell. It took us 3 hours to drive from Portland back to the Seattle area. We left the quiet vigil at a long-term parking garage under a different fake name, and took a taxi to a clean, anonymous hotel near the airport, far away from the compromised Redmond house. I changed my clothes one last time, putting on the most unremarkable garments I owned, beige slacks, a dark sweater, and my old, slightly stretched gardening gloves, tucked into my pocket. The mask was back on, but thinner, fragile. Chloe's plane was due to land at 9 p.m. I used the time to brief Leo one last time. He was exhausted, but his focus never wavered. He understood that the greatest threat now was not armed men, but his mother's disbelief. You stick to the story, Leo, I coached him. We were visiting Mrs. Peterson's sister. Grandma had a migraine. The cell service was terrible. You missed Mommy. I know, Grandma, he whispered, pressing the loom band bracelet on his wrist. I'm sorry we can't tell her. We will tell her some of it, darling. Enough so she trusts me. But not enough to put the target on her back. At 9:30 p.m., Chloe called from the curb. Her voice was sharp with exhaustion and renewed annoyance. Mom, where are you? I'm standing at baggage claim. Why isn't your phone working, and why did you have to drive? I could have taken a shuttle. I'm sorry, honey. We're in a hotel right by the airport. Leo has been asleep, and I didn't want to drag him out to the traffic. We'll be down in 5 minutes. We took the elevator down to the lobby. Chloe spotted us instantly. She was impeccably dressed, her New York conference demeanor still clinging to her like expensive perfume. She looked tired, frustrated, and entirely out of sync with the messy reality I had just left. Mom, honestly, this is just weird, she said, not as a question, but as a judgment, as she walked over. She hugged Leo fiercely, clinging to her son. Are you okay, sweetheart? Did Grandma make you eat oatmeal all week? Leo just held her tightly. I missed you, Mommy. I kept my distance, letting them have their moment, observing Chloe's reaction. She looked utterly perplexed by my appearance, the slightly disheveled look, the palpable tension radiating from me. What happened to your glasses, Mom? Did you lose them? I hadn't worn my reading glasses, part of the Lara Vance costume, for 24 hours. Oh, they broke. I have to get new ones, I lied easily. We loaded into the taxi, heading back to the Redmond house, not to stay, but to retrieve vital documents and destroy the final layers of my false life. The drive was silent. Chloe was clearly building a case against my irresponsibility in her mind. When we finally reached the house, it felt sterile and cold. The pink hibiscus was still there, but now it looked like a grotesque joke. Chloe turned to me the moment the door closed, her voice rising with controlled anger. Okay, Mom. Enough. Tell me what's going on. You leave without telling anyone, you lie about where you were, and you look like you haven't slept in a week. Did something happen with your health? Did you get into debt? It was now or never. I couldn't use the old excuses. I had to breach the wall. I took a deep breath, placing my hands on her shoulders. I looked directly into her eyes that held my future. Chloe, sit down. Both of you. Leo went straight to the kitchen table, instantly alert. Chloe hesitated, surprised by my sudden seriousness. I was not visiting Mrs. Peterson's sister. I was running. Chloe frowned, crossing her arms. Running from what, Mom? A bad bridge game. From a very dangerous man. A former business associate who resurfaced and threatened to hurt me and you and Leo. I kept the narrative vague but intense. I spoke of corporate secrets, stolen data, and high-level betrayal, a narrative she could process as a successful consultant. 20 years ago, I worked on a specialized project, high risk, high reward. The data I secured was worth billions. My partner, Marcus Bell, decided he wanted to use that information for corruption and power. I stopped him. I faked my retirement, changed my life, and built this safe house so you could have a life free of the danger. Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. You think I'm going to believe this, Mom? You were gardening and making casseroles. The garden was camouflage, Chloe. The casseroles were a schedule. Everything was designed to make me invisible. But Marcus found us. He found the house. That hibiscus on the porch? It was his mark. That's why Leo and I had to leave immediately. I watched her face as she processed the impossible reality. Her mother, the woman who worried about cracked sidewalks, was a ghost. He threatened Leo? She asked, the anger replaced by a flicker of true fear. Yes. He tried to use us to get the data back. But I confronted him. I secured the evidence and I neutralized the threat. Marcus Bell is going to prison, Chloe. He is finished. I walked to the kitchen counter and placed the steel scent halves in front of her. This is what he wanted. It contains the key to a data lock. It's worthless now, the data has been sent, but it represents the last 20 years of my sacrifice. Chloe picked up the heavy, ugly metal halves. She looked at the scars and the precision of the split. This was too real, too detailed to be fiction. She looked from the coin to my face, seeing for the first time the steel beneath the serenity. "My God, Mom," she whispered. "Who are you?" "I am your mother. And now that the thread is gone, we can stop lying. But we have to move, Chloe. We can never come back here. The quiet life is over, but the safe life is just beginning." The wall had fallen. The journey of painful truth was finally underway. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. Chloe's shock quickly morphed into a furious, defensive protectiveness, not for her own safety, but for Leo's. "You mean to tell me," she articulated, her voice shaking, "that Leo has been living under this threat his entire life? And you never told me?" "I never told you because I needed you to be authentic, Chloe. Your ignorance was your best defense. If you had known, you would have acted differently, behaved erratically, and that would have led Marcus straight to us. Leo was trained in operational security, you were not." The words were harsh, but necessary. Chloe turned to Leo, who was watching their exchange with painful seriousness. "Did you know all this, sweetheart?" Leo nodded slowly. "Grandma taught me the rules. I helped her today. I protected the treasure map." Chloe closed her eyes, processing the enormity of her quiet life being revealed as a brilliant, terrifying stage play. When she opened them, the old exasperation was replaced by a bewildered awe, laced with resentment. "So, what happens now, Agent Vance? Do we change our names and move to Argentina?" "We move, but cleanly. Marcus is neutralized, but his organization is not. We are leaving the compromised territory." I walked toward the small, locked cabinet behind the bookshelves, a secret compartment that held the true operational assets of Alara Vance. I pulled out several heavy envelopes filled with currency, passports in various names, and deeds to properties bought decades ago in remote, cash-only transactions. Tonight, we liquidate. We drain the local accounts, sell the house to a shell corporation I established years ago, and sever all digital ties to this address. By tomorrow morning, this address will be nothing but a financial ghost. I activated the command I had set up before leaving Portland. The house, the perfect suburban lie, was already sold, effective midnight. I sat Chloe down and handed her a bank statement, a secure, offshore trust account that held the true wealth I had accrued during my operational years and carefully preserved. "This is yours, Chloe. It's clean, untraceable, and secured against any corporate action. It's your safety net. I built it for you to live freely, no matter what happened to me." Chloe looked at the staggering figure on the statement, then back at the steel cent in her hand. The pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together, creating a portrait of a mother who was not negligent, but fiercely, dangerously devoted. "This changes everything, Mom," she whispered. "It changes the address, Chloe. It doesn't change us. I am still your mother. I just need you to trust me now, without question, for the next 48 hours. I gave her specific, technical instructions: download a secure messaging app, delete all social media accounts, and clear her browser history on all devices. She was entering a protocol of silence. As we packed the few essentials, mostly pictures, Leo's favorite toys, and essential documents, I performed the final act of destruction. I walked to the kitchen and used the burner phone to make one last, swift financial transaction. I activated the data on the two halves of the steel cent one last time, using the information not for defense, but for transfer. I drained the last active operational contingency fund and transferred a massive sum, enough to secure Chloe and Leo's financial future beyond any doubt, into Chloe's new, secure account. The act rendered the chip's information completely useless to anyone else. It was spent. I looked at the coin again, noting the slight, internal burn mark from the final electronic discharge. The artifact that had ruled my life was now just inert metal. I placed the two halves in Leo's hand. "It's a souvenir now, Leo. The war is over." Leo tucked the halves into his pocket, his expression thoughtful. By 2 a.m., we were ready. We left the house through the back door, using the same quiet professionalism Leo and I had practiced a lifetime ago. We took nothing that could tie us to the suburban existence. We drove in a pre-booked, anonymous car service to a private airfield, another layer of my old security infrastructure. As we ascended into the cool, dark sky in a private charter, I looked down at the sprawling lights of the city. Somewhere down there, Marcus Bell was being booked into custody, and Carlisle's devastating data leak was beginning to hit the morning wires. Chloe sat next to me, holding Leo's sleeping form, her face pale but determined. She was no longer annoyed, she was integrating the truth. The 20-year deception had finally paid off. She was safe, educated, and wealthy enough to start over. "Where are we going, Mom?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. Where the sun rises over mountains, not suburbs. Somewhere we can truly be ourselves." I was taking them to a small, isolated town in rural Vermont, a safe haven I had purchased under a third identity decades ago. A place where Alara Vance could finally be fully integrated with Evelyn Thorne. The flight was smooth, carrying us into the dawn, into a life where the mask had been shed forever. 3 weeks later, we lived in a house built of stone and cedar on the side of a mountain in Vermont. The air here was different, sharp, clean, smelling of pine and cold earth. There were no white picket fences, no perfectly manicured lawns. Only wild maples that had shed their fiery leaves, and a silence that was real, not manufactured. Our new home was smaller, more modest, but its foundation was sunk deep into granite bedrock. Pitt, as a parting gift, had installed a security system that was invisible, but an order-off magnitude more sophisticated than the one that had guarded our suburban facade. The news about Marcus Bell and Ares Global Security had become the background noise of our new life. The data Carlisle had leaked had detonated with surgical precision. Marcus was in a federal penitentiary, awaiting trial on dozens of charges, from economic terrorism to corporate espionage. His empire was collapsing, picked apart by competitors and federal agents. He was buried beneath the weight of his own ambition. One evening, Chloe was watching a news broadcast that showed Marcus being led in handcuffs from the courthouse. His face was thin, gaunt, stripped of all its power. "I still can't believe it," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "That all this time you were living like this." "That life is gone, Chloe," I replied, turning off the television. "Now there is only this one." Our relationship had changed. The alienation, built up over years, had been replaced by a cautious, almost reverent respect. She no longer saw me as an aging, eccentric mother. She saw me as a stranger she was just beginning to know, and in her gaze was a mixture of fear, admiration, and a deep, belated love. She mourned the simplicity of the life she thought she'd had, while accepting the complex truth of the one she'd been given. The next morning, I found Leo in the yard. He was practicing the moves I had shown him, his small body moving with a serious focus. "Not like that, sweetie," I said gently, walking over to him. "You're trying to use force. Use his momentum. If someone pushes, you don't resist. You guide." I took his wrist and showed him a simple but effective self-defense technique, how to use an opponent's weight to unbalance them. He learned quickly, his mind as sharp as his intuition. Chloe watched us from the porch, her arms crossed. There was no horror or judgment in her eyes, only a quiet, thoughtful acceptance. She understood this wasn't a lesson in violence. It was a lesson in survival, a lesson in vigilance. Later, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, the three of us sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets. Leo held the two halves of the 1943 steel cent in his hand, now smooth and warm from his touch. It was no longer a treasure map or a key to power. It was just a souvenir, a reminder. I had built a life in silence, and then I had destroyed it to build a new one. The silence was gone. All that was left was vigilance. And that was better than a lie. We left. And that became our new beginning. My quiet life was over, but my quiet vigil had just begun.